Be honest, when I show you this clip, what's the first impression you get from it? If your answer was, oh wow, that guy's totally dead, well then good. Your reaction was normal. You saw the death of a character and reacted accordingly. Also, you're a fool and you're wrong and he's actually alive, L plus ratio plus no bitches plus. The current problem I'm seeing in modern media is that more often than not these days, when you witness the death of a character in a movie or show, you can never be certain that that character is, in fact, dead. Nowadays, if the writers think it would be neat to just bring that character back, they can write some half-assed explanation for how that happened and bada bing bada boom, they're back in business. Sometimes there's not even an explanation. Look at old Palpy, he's just here now. How neat. Personally, when I watched Cobb Vanth get shot by Cad Bane in the penultimate episode of The Book of Boba Fett, my instinctive reaction was, oh, okay, he'll be fine. There honestly was not even a single second where I humored the possibility that I had just witnessed the death of a character. He's a character that many people seem to like, he's played by a good-looking and charming actor, and, well, let's face it, this is Star Wars, and in Star Wars,
no one's ever really gone.
In the following episode, we have a scene where Mando talks to one of the people of Freetown, and we get this interaction.
I'm sorry about the Marshal.
Gunned him down in cold blood.
And I kid you not, this was the first time that I thought Cobb Vanth was actually dead. I remember my roommate and I were talking about how weird it was that in order for us to accept this as a character death, we had to have it verbally confirmed to us in the next episode. Neither of us would have just believed it or not outright said, and that's a serious problem. Of course, by the end of the episode, the show pulls a complete 180 and shows us that he's alive and resting in Boba's bacta tank because, God forbid, we have any semblance of permanent consequences in our show about crime wars and bounty hunters. No, of course not. What was I thinking? But putting that aside, I've given a lot of thought since then about the implications of this, and I'm not sure I like what it means for the current state of pop culture. If I can't even believe I've witnessed a character death without one of the characters saying that it happened, and what's worse, finding out that that confirmation was a lie in the very same episode, then how can I, as a consumer of the product, trust anything the writers try to establish as canon to their world? Now, I know I'm definitely not the first person to point out this problem. Frankly, it's been a growing issue within our storytelling culture for some time now. I just think that in recent years, it's gotten a lot worse. And let me be clear, when it comes to writing a story, there really aren't as many limitations as one might think. As long as you can keep consistent with the logic of the world you've created, you can pretty much do whatever you want and trust that your audience will accept it because you've put in the effort to write it well. That said, the concept of reviving characters previously written to have died is neither new nor inherently bad. As with pretty much everything else, the key lies in execution. If you put in the legwork to make sure that a few things are taken care of, you can absolutely do this in your story, but to a limited degree. And I'm not here to dictate where that limit is. Frankly, where one person can suspend their disbelief might be where another can't, and that's all completely subjective. I certainly wouldn't advise doing it more than once or twice at the most, but hey, it's your story. Knock yourself out. The thing about character deaths is that they're one of the most efficient ways of establishing stakes in your story. It goes without saying that the death of a character, whether they're a main character, side character, good guy, bad guy, whatever the case, has a significant consequence on the world going forward, and is typically also a significant consequence of whatever actions were taken before. What those consequences entail will depend entirely on the character in question and the context of the story, but that general principle applies in most cases. Take, for example, Emperor Palpatine. He is, of course, the main villain of the entire Star Wars saga, manipulating all the events and characters to fit his own design so that he can ultimately rule the galaxy. He played all factions against one another and quite literally started a chess game against himself in the form of the Clone Wars in order to ensure that he came out on top no matter what. And in the process, he turned the most powerful man in the galaxy into his puppet to bring about his every whim. He's smart, cunning, brilliant, and so he presents the greatest obstacle to our heroes throughout the first 6 movies. To defeat him is going to be difficult because in order to do so, you'll have to not only bring down his empire and establish a new order in its place, but you're going to have to somehow remove the stranglehold he has around Darth Vader so that he no longer has his most powerful enforcer enacting his will. In Return of the Jedi, we see Luke do exactly that by embracing the man Vader used to be and appealing to the humanity still left inside of him. It was the one thing Palpatine couldn't possibly have accounted for, despite his mastery and manipulation, because he doesn't know what it's like to love somebody so much that you would die for them. And die Vader does. In a risk-all moment, he breaks free of the chains Palpatine placed him in all those years ago in order order to save his son, and sacrifices his life in the process. This in turn restores balance in the Force, as the prophecy which has dictated so much of his life said it would, and puts an end to the Emperor's tyranny the galaxy over. It was a victory that cost our main characters a great deal, but one that was ultimately worth it, as they achieved the freedom for which they so desperately fought. Flash forward to the rise of Skywalker. Palpatine is back now, inexplicably, and simply because of this, the accomplishments Anakin achieved in his final moments of life are now rendered somewhat moot. Now, yes, he did still choose to save Luke from Palpatine and die a hero, so he still gets to go to space heaven. Yay for him. But although his character growth is still intact, we now have established that he is in fact not the chosen one. That title now goes to Rey, I guess, because she had the bright idea of using 2 lightsabers to deflect Palpatine's lightning instead of just one, which apparently made all the difference. I'm getting off track. The point is that bringing Palpatine back is something that, no matter how well executed, and it really wasn't, you're automatically looking at some serious damage to the overall narrative and legacy of your story. Character resurrections like this are what I would say are probably the most offensive kind, and you definitely want to look out for that. If you really want to bring back that character you killed off, feel free, no one's stopping you, but I'm just cautioning you to be mindful of what impact that will ultimately have on the narrative and stakes. My recommendation would honestly be just to rewrite it so that you never killed them off, or failing that, just accept that they're dead and move on with your story. But let's look at a character like Boba Fett. Resurrecting him from falling in the Sarlacc doesn't inherently destroy any narrative, and it doesn't contradict anything we know about the world. All we know is that the Sarlacc has the ability to digest its food over the course of 1,000 years, and that doesn't really mean all that much, considering even if it kept its victims alive with nutrients for whatever reason, the average lifespan of whatever the thing is digesting is likely to be roughly 100 years-ish. Unless it's like Yoda or something, that would be unfortunate. So yes, absolutely we can bring Boba back, and we can even say that his armor was able to protect him from taking any lethal damage from the Sarlacc's stomach acids. So if we have a character return that, unlike Palpatine's, was explained and makes sense with the logic of the universe, then what's the problem? In the case of Boba Fett, the execution of the story we're then presented is where this one ultimately fails. I've already made multiple videos talking about why the writing in this series is terrible, and I don't really intend to repeat myself too much. You're more than welcome to check them out if you'd like, and I'll leave them linked down below. But to sum it up, we essentially got a version of the character who went from the cold, calculating, stoic, and ruthless badass seen in the original trilogy to what I would imagine Ned Flanders would be if he were a crime boss on Tatooine. There is no real explanation for this transition. People like to cite the Tusken Raider flashbacks as to his development as a character, but from those scenes, we don't get anything of the sort. We have a guy imprisoned and enslaved by savages, trying and failing to escape them, and then deciding to become one of them out of absolutely nowhere. Then he becomes engrossed in their tribe, and then they all die, and that's about it. Like I said earlier, execution is key. There is nothing inherently wrong with bringing back this character, but because the last time we saw him this happened, we're gonna need a justifiable reason for bringing him back other than he looks cool. And to do that, we need to give him a story that fits with Boba as a character and makes logical sense in this world, which is not what we got. And like I've said in the past, if you want Boba to be this honor-bound hero, then go for it. I am absolutely down to see that. Just show us that development rather than vaguely implying it if you squint hard enough. Shifting focus for a moment, I want to take a look at yet another character from Star Wars who was brought back to life. Yeah, this franchise does it a lot, but in a way that I would actually argue was done pretty well. He's also arguably the most popular example in this franchise when referring to character revivals, even more so than Boba Fett, I think. The character you no doubt already realize I'm talking about is Darth Maul. Now, what's interesting here is that, from what I remember in the Clone Wars, Maul surviving his duel against Obi-Wan in Episode 1 is never properly explained. The last time we saw him up until this point was him getting cut in half and falling really far down this big hole! And then suddenly he's here on a trash planet with a bunch of mechanical spider legs and a talking yellow snake named Morley who brings him food. To my knowledge, the only time it's ever actually explained how the fuck he managed to pull that off was in a comic that's no longer considered canon under the Disney umbrella. And I think I've made it pretty clear in the past how I feel when the movies and shows try to rely on third-party media to explain plot contrivances or holes. I don't like it. But credit where credit is due, I still think the return of Darth Maul was well done despite this, and I'm gonna explain why. People like to argue that Maul wasn't much of a character in The Phantom Menace, but similarly to how some people view Boba from the original trilogy as overrated because all he does is stand around looking cool, Darth Maul served the purpose he was meant to serve in that story. He pushed the plot forward, presented a challenge for our Jedi characters, and killed off Qui-Gon, possibly the one person who could have trained Anakin to become a Jedi Jedi without him ultimately becoming a Sith. Essentially, if there's no Darth Maul in Episode 1, then there's no Darth Vader in the OT. But like I was saying earlier, when you retcon the solidified death of an important character, you have to worry about justifying his existence in the story you're now creating. Which means that the strong silent type we saw in The Phantom Menace is not going to cut it this time. To justify bringing him back, we need to learn more about him, what drives him, what his goals are. We need to understand how his return affects the world around him and the characters in it. You've brought him back during a time of war, with the Jedi versus Sith conflict right at the forefront for the first time in a millennium. And Darth Maul is a character whose main purpose is getting revenge against the Jedi who caused him to spend 12 long, arduous years fighting death itself while his sanity slowly chipped away from him. And right there you have great potential for conflict with one of the main characters of our story. And the revenge plot is all fine and good. Like I said, it makes for great drama, and from it we can get multiple great stories that not only make us further understand Maul, but Obi-Wan as well. And these are some of my favorite episodes on the show because it challenges the very core of what we know Obi-Wan to be as a character. The sassy, quippy warrior who stands firm against temptation and always chooses the light side because he knows how easy it would be to give in to hate, and that goes against the very fundamentals of being a Jedi. I cannot stress enough how much I love it when my favorite character in all of storytelling faces these challenges to his core values and ultimately comes out a better man because of it. But what I also find interesting about what they did with Maul, and what I really wasn't expecting, was how they handled his relationship to Sidious and to the Sith Order as a whole. He feels betrayed for having been so easily forgotten by his master, the man who raised him since infancy to be an unstoppable weapon, but who ultimately showed that he didn't care about him beyond that. All those years trying to please his master, and the second he loses one fight, Sidious never gives him another thought. Initially, he believes that he can do better. He wants to revive the Sith and gain ultimate power in the galaxy, and he wants to do it with his brother, the one who found him and saved him in the first place. As far as he's concerned, Sidious and Dooku are simple pretenders of the true Sith, and that makes for such an interesting rivalry. But even better is when Maul ultimately decides that he doesn't care about the Sith any more than the Jedi, and as far as he's concerned, they can all go to hell. In the Siege of Mandalore, he offers Ahsoka a chance to join him, to defeat Sidious. He sees her as an exact reflection of himself, someone who was cast aside by greater powers who think they have the right to govern who is and isn't important. Maul's new path from here on out going into Rebels is the belief that the only thing in all the galaxy he should care about is himself. But there's still the matter of Kenobi, the one who started all of his pain those decades ago, and when he finds out that Obi-Wan survived the Jedi Purge, his focus becomes singular. He will find him, and he will kill him. We get what's quite possibly the greatest scene in Star Wars Rebels when he eventually finds him on Tatooine sitting by a campfire. They have a conversation about Maul's only real desire ever being to dominate, which is why after all these years, he still has nothing to show for it. Then Maul indirectly threatens the safety of Luke, and in that moment, Obi-Wan goes on the defensive, because like I said, the return of Maul did wonders for his character too. He first goes into his classic fighting pose that we see in the Clone Wars and in Episode 3, before refining it to the classic Alec Guinness stance, and then finally settling on that of Qui-Gon Jinn. It's a perfect example of visual storytelling done expertly, capped off when Maul finally lunges at him and attempts to use the exact same move on Obi-Wan that he used to kill Qui-Gon, only to fail, showcasing how Obi-Wan has grown while Maul stayed the same. And then in his final moments, he dies in the arms of his greatest enemy, and after all these years, the two are finally able to find some solidarity. He asks Obi-Wan if the one he's protecting is the Chosen One, before stating that Luke will avenge them. When he dies, Obi-Wan closes his eyes and allows him to go peacefully into the night. They took a character who was already good, but they made him better, and gave him a satisfying story with a satisfying ending.
Kira, you and I will be working much more closely from now on.
Yeah, so that happened. Frankly, much as I love Solo, this was the beginning of the end for Maul. Actually, just the end, because that movie never got any proper follow-ups, but this was very clearly meant to be setting up something big, and it's annoying because we had already ended the story so perfectly. There was no reason to bring him back. Yes, the events of Solo take place before Rebels. It isn't that his return here doesn't fit with the timeline and needs to be explained, just that his story had already finished. And now you want to make him some big bad in a Han Solo story? The more times you bring a character back, the more it's going to impact your narrative, like I was saying earlier. It disregards the very concept of finality. Here's the thing, Star Wars is a franchise known for telling everything out of order. That's totally fine. I mean, hell, if I got mad every time a character was used in a story that takes place before their death but came out after the fact, then I wouldn't like anything with Obi-Wan that came out after A New Hope, which is everything. The problem in the case of Maul is that you can't really do anything substantial with his character from here. His two main motivations since returning in the Clone Wars have been to kill Obi-Wan and to gain power, while in the process taking out Palpatine as a rival. Well, we know he can't do any of that because he doesn't find out Obi-Wan is alive until Rebels, we know he never defeats Palpatine, and he already has power. He's leading one of the most powerful criminal syndicates in the galaxy. They also can't even really make him an antagonist in whatever Solo sequel they may have been planning, because Han doesn't even believe in the Force by the time we meet him in A New Hope. An optimistic person would say that they can still do interesting stories with his character set before Rebels. I personally would love to see how he went from leading Crimson Dawn to being a hermit stranded on Malachor with absolutely nothing left. But Disney hasn't exactly given me ample reason to be optimistic about their handling of this franchise. The reason I've been using Star Wars examples this whole video, despite the fact that there are a shit ton of other franchises out there suffering from this problem as well, is because since the Disney acquisition of the franchise, this has happened countless times, and it's gotten to the point where I can never just trust that a character is truly gone. Hell, The Rise of Skywalker had like 5 fake-out deaths, and that was over the span of 2 fucking hours. But of course, yes, there are plenty of other franchises using this trick as well, and a lot of times it falls completely flat. Notice how the first thing everyone did after Kingpin was supposedly killed in the Hawkeye finale was speculate how they'll inevitably bring him back for the apparent Daredevil revival that I'm still not even really sure is happening. People tweeted images from the comics where a very similar set of circumstances went down, which Kingpin survived, leaving absolutely no room for doubt that he's coming back. I honestly am totally fine with the concept of Kingpin returning, if for no other reason than because he's such a great character and it would be a shame to waste him the way Hawkeye did. But my suggestion from the start would have been to just recanonize Daredevil and the other Marvel Netflix shows, since they had a whole treasure vault of great stories that they flushed away for no reason, just to make way for their new shows, which could easily have just been reworked a tad to fit with those shows. But fuck, what do I know? I'm just some guy on the internet. I don't understand what goes on behind the curtain and should therefore just accept whatever asinine garbage they spoon-feed me. Anyway, if I haven't already made the point of this video clear, I really don't know how else to put it. The essentials boil down to this. Character deaths are a storytelling device that used to be sacred, and every time you undo one, you're jeopardizing your entire story and need to proceed with extreme care. Imagine if in Breaking Bad, Hank just dug himself up out of the sand, walked back to civilization, and roundhouse kicked Walt, saving the day and giving Marie a big ol' kiss on the lips, and then Walt Jr. claps and the whole family sings Kumbaya while Walt is promptly arrested for his crimes.
You sussy bata!
Yes, I know this is an exaggeration for comedic effect. You don't have to tell me that, thanks. The point is, the second you tell me something isn't quite as final as you initially said it was, I'm gonna have a hard time trusting anything you say, so you'd better make it count for something. And that's all I've got for you this time, so I guess I'll see ya whenever I start hearing the voices again. Later, skaters!